IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome once again to Police Chowki. I'm your host Shrikrishna Upadhyaya, and the guest with me on the show today is Mr. Javeed Ahmad. Mr. Ahmad is the former IPS officer and served as the DGP of Uttar Pradesh. Welcome back to Police Chowki, Mr. Ahmad.
Good afternoon, Sri. It's been a long time. Yes, it's good to be back. Thank you.
Right, and today is a special episode because we are concluding our limited series, Police Chowki. And what we are going to be doing today is also a little different because over the past 6 months or so, we have done multiple episodes covering different aspects of policing in the country, have gone into deep dives into many of these angles. And we have had numerous guests joining us on the show, former IPS officers, working police officers, some social activists, journalists, and so on. So it has been a fascinating ride. And today is when we'll zoom out, rush back, take a look at what we have done, and also discuss some of the key takeaways from all the discussions we have had over the months. So, Mr. Ahmad, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you today.
Yeah, great. Yeah. This is a good time to just go back, as you said, over all these 24 episodes that we've done, and hopefully all these episodes have given some insight about the working of the police, and hopefully also tickle the interest of public policy students to understand why the police does what it does and what needs to be done to make it work better.
That's right. And that's exactly the objective we started off this series with, right? That's to educate and make more people aware about the inner workings of the police, as well as casting an outside eye so that we understand issues regarding police reform, police accountability, and so on in the macro lens of democracy, republic, institutional checks and balances, and so on. So I think we have covered so many aspects. I'll quickly recap them, and I'll also plug all these into the show notes of today's episode, so that anybody who wants to take a look at all the 24 episodes we have done so far has it in one place, right? So we began with a very simple micro look at a police officer that is a constable, and we talked about a day in the life of a cop back in May 2023 when we did the first episode, and we followed it up by how police is governed and regulated. We looked at police laws in the country. Section 144 was a topic of interest for us, so we did a deep dive into how Section 144 of CRPC is being used and misused in the country. This is, of course, the provision under which the police imposes curfew. We spent quite a few episodes doing criminal investigation and criminal trials because that is such a major aspect of policing in the country. So we did episodes on investigation, prosecution, about predictive policing, community policing, and certain specialized aspect of crime and investigation, such as forensic science, cyber crimes, and so on. Then we also sort of looked at the police personnel in more detail, such as the episode on women in policing, where we spoke about the representation of women, how the police interacts with women as a constituency, the prejudices that women police officers face in their day-to-day job, and so on. Then something else that we did was also, looking at these specialized institutional police, such as the CBI or India's Central Armed Police Forces, the CRPF, ITBP, SSB, BSF, and so on. We also did an episode on traffic police, which, by the way, is one of my favorites because we had Mr. M.N. Reddy with us, who spoke so much in detail about what he did for traffic policing in Bangalore, the city that I live in. Similarly, we did some very interesting episodes on the new penal codes that came out last year, which now, by the way, are going to come into force sometime in June, July. The Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, Bharatiya Nagrik Suriksha Sanhita. We went into much detail discussing many of these new provisions that are going to be in the law. And I think we also did some interesting episodes around gun control laws, case of missing persons in the country, how is an economic crime understood and investigated. We also looked at certain pillars of criminal justice system like the prison system. Then we also topped it off with an episode on the disaster response, because as we know, police is very much involved in disaster response in the country. They're, in fact, the first responder when any natural calamity strikes us. And we topped all of this off with a very cool and interesting episode on horseback police in the country, right? The cops who ride the horses. And that was, in fact, the 24th episode. And that's also one of my favorite because it's a very little known and little understood aspect of policing in the country. So a fantastic ride so far. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some macro themes which has emerged out of all our discussions so far, and then look at why, and essentially try to answer the question as to why you as a citizen, the listener, has to care about policing a little bit more in the country and has the duty to care that duty to demand that we get better policing in the country. So I'll pause here, Mr. Ahmed. Any thoughts on all the episodes that we have done so far? Anything you would like to add or mention?
Yes, yeah, I think you've very rightly talked about the various aspects of how the police works, what are its limitations, and what are the focus areas for the police when they're doing different aspects of their job. And I'm sure it has given a kind of shone the light on the working of the police. But at this stage, it is important for us to recall, I think, the first or the second episode when we talked about why knowing about how the police functions is important for the citizenry at large, and also for public policy enthusiasts. And I'll repeat that when we end today, as we are ending today. And I'd like to emphasize that police is a subject, or the working of the police is important to each one of us, because the fundamental rights which we have under the Constitution and which we virtually take for granted, whether it is the right to speech, free speech, or the right to property, or right to profession, or right of movement, etc. While all these can be enforced in a court of law, the first responsibility of ensuring that these rights are available to be enjoyed by every citizen is that of the civil police, who are there on the street corner, on the highway, and while you're sleeping and while you're working, to ensure that the affairs of the state, and the affairs of the society, and the affairs of the individual are carried out in a peaceful manner, without let or hindrance by anyone who has any mischievous intent.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I'm proud about this show, is that we did not just limit ourselves as outsiders to look at police as any arm of the state and try and talk about the problems it has. We in fact took an insider's view in more occasions than one, and we had a lot of serving and former cops who came and spoke to us about the inner workings, the inner challenges, the good men and women in police who are doing so much more for better law and order, for better protecting our rights, for better criminal investigation in the country. And like you just mentioned about how important the police as an institution is in a constitutional republic for protecting our fundamental rights. And that in turn should drive home the point as to why we must demand more from our police, why we must have more accountability from the police, because it's so important, and it literally stands between a constitutional republic and dysfunctional republic or autocratic regime, right? So that's something we'll talk about today also. But before that, I thought we'll begin from an economic lens, right? Why is police an important public good that the state has to provide? So in essence, a public good is something which is non-excludable and non-rivalrous, right? And essentially the state has to produce this because the private sector is not going to be doing this. But policing also has massive externalities in the sense that better law and order, better criminal investigation leads to social stability, leads to better business opportunity, better economic growth. All of it leads to a much more trust in the society, if I may put it that way. So on the other side of things, the way our society is structured today, there is a immense need for respect for individual rights, for property rights. And like you just mentioned, all these rights which are enshrined in our constitution are actually first protected and preserved by the police, right? And this is not just about a constitution. Even before that, for a system that is based around property and individual rights to exist, we need a good and working police force. So that was my thought of this entire aspect from an economic lens.
It's interesting you talk about the economic importance and the importance of the police from the economic point of view. It is quite ironical, Shri, in fact, that whether it is the state budget or the central budget, the police is under what is called the non-plan expenditure, as opposed to planned expenditure. The planned expenditure in the government lexicon is something that adds to the capital assets or the assets of the state, whether it is building of roads or bridges or power or education or whatever. Whereas something as basic as policing, which kind of underwrites all these other activities, because if there's no law and order, if there's no peace, none of these activities would either be possible or be enjoyed by the large number of people who want to enjoy it. So it is quite ironical that policing continues to be what is called the non-plan expenditure. So, it is seen as something which has to be done, but which has no real economic benefits. And it's very important that you talk about the externalities of a good policing system and of a good law and order situation, which as I said, is the underlying basis or the grid on which everything else is built. And as India is growing in terms of economic power and has aspirations of becoming a developed country in the next 25 years, it is very important that we realize that spending money on better policing, on better infrastructure for the police, and making the police more accountable, trustworthy, and professional is in a way part of the capital infrastructure that you're building, because that underwrites many of the other things that are physically going to happen.
Yeah. And that's a great insight that you provided, that, in terms of budgetary priority, police is just not up there where it is supposed to be, because I think I would put it as equally important, if not more, like physical infrastructure, right? India is undertaking massive expansion of its physical infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, and so on. But to truly emerge as a developed country, we do require institutional capacity within the police, and that requires far great investment, expansion of capacity within the police over the next few decades. The other angle that I sort of want to bring in is, why police is so important to rule of law. And if we want to protect the citizenry from rule by men instead of rule of law, then we need a good standing functional police which can act independently without fear of favor. And this has always been a critical flaw, if you ask me, in the Indian setup, right? Because the police can barely function independently. It is fully within the control of whoever the political master of the day is. Of course, this doesn't mean there is complete dominance by the political class over the police, but there is enough to move the levers in a way that sometimes leads to unjust outcomes, right? And this is a structural fault. Almost every state would has police under its control, and nobody wants to change the status quo. But do you think this is a major problem that is going to stop India from emerging as a robust constitutional republic, simply because there is not enough independence for our law enforcement agencies?
Yeah, so Sri, let me say that the police need not be independent. I mean, ultimately, the police is a part of the executive, branch of the government, which is represented by the chief minister or the political executive of the time. I would frame it slightly differently. It should not be independent of the political executive, who are representatives of the people, but it should be accountable to the political executive and also to the public. rather than being subservient to the wishes and the biases and even the political interests of those who are in political power at the time. That distinction is important, because if you're accountable, then it means that you are doing things which you are required to do as per law, and irrespective of whether it favors or disfavors those who are in authority. Whereas if you are subservient or in a way subservient to the political executive, then the law is not what is guiding you. It is what the ruler or the master is saying which is guiding you. So that distinction needs to be made. The police need not be independent. It cannot be independent of the sovereign country that we are in, but it has to be accountable. It should be accountable in terms of its working, independent in terms of its operations.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. And I agree with you with your characterization. And thanks for clarifying that bit. Because we're not talking about police running a parallel government. Of course, that's not much like our armed forces. It needs to be under civilian control. But like I said, in its working, there's a lot of political interference, which may be unjustified and, undesirable in a democratic setup such as ours. But there are two angles to it. One is, structural incentives, right, which will force police officers, especially those in power and the higher ups, to behave in a certain manner. And second is of personal integrity, right? Now, personal integrity is a different matter altogether. There's always going to be bad apples in any system, but the strength of any system is that the good ones are rewarded. There are incentives to be on good behavior, to ensure that they uphold their oath to the constitution and carry out their duties, right? So in that aspect, I feel our system is a bit lagging.
Yes, definitely. The way the structures have been built and have continued to function despite repeated interventions of the Honorable Supreme Court, where you are aware of the Prakash Singh case and many other judgments that the court has passed. The very famous D.K. Basu case, in which the rights of people who are being arrested had been delineated in great detail. The police, for reasons which are totally non-professional, has continued to be has continued to allow itself to be twisted or used by those who are politically powerful. Now, as you very rightly said, there are very many, and I emphasize there are very many honorable exceptions to this. There are a number of political masters who I'm aware of, who have allowed the police to function broadly in an independent manner in terms of its operations. And there are a large number of police officers of various ranks, starting from the sub-inspector and upwards, who have not allowed the political dictates to color their operational work. But the system should be such that, as you rightly said, those who are on the right side of the law and who are doing things or operating in a manner which is in consonance with the law should not ever feel that they will be punished for it. Rather, they should have a feeling that they will be rewarded for it. Unfortunately, there are instances when people have been not only been admonished for being correct in their behavior or professional in their behavior. Unfortunately, there have also been cases of people being punished for such behavior, and that has a very, very chilling effect on a large number of people who kind of see the writing on the wall, and then they make this decision about whether they need to uphold the law at the expense of their own pain and the pain of their family members, I must add, as against flowing with the tide and allowing things to happen. That environment, that is created through a few acts of punishing the righteous police officer creates a lot of disquiet amongst many officers who would normally be wanting to uphold the law in a professional manner. This ecosystem that is created is very disturbing. It is very harmful, and I hope that as we develop as a democracy, the political masters will realize that law and order and good policing are subjects that will pay dividends, and as opposed to favoring a few of their known people or their supporters, and feeling that that itself is enough for them to get the popular mandate or the popular you know popular approval.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
That's right. Now I want to sort of move on to the next important aspect of policing, which rests with the criminal justice system, the larger criminal justice system, and its functioning in the country. And that unfortunately paints a rather bleak picture. Although now we have had some criminal law reforms, but there is so much more to be done in terms of addition of state capacity over the years, so that India has a more functional criminal justice system, right? And there are many aspects to this. Police, of course, is a very crucial aspect, but there are also prisons which are overcrowded, under trials languishing in the prison system. And then you have district courts which are not properly staffed. You don't have enough good prosecutors or defense lawyers and so on, which again is a larger issue, but I want to sort of talk about it in the context of the Indian police, right? Because ultimately, what happens is this shortage of infrastructure, the shortage of resources, also forces police hands. Then there's a larger societal cost to it, which in the sense is that I've always believed that what really matters is not the degree of punishment, but rather the certainty of punishment. And when the certainty of punishment is lost, then there are massive social costs. It has, regular criminals not worried about any consequence because they're like, okay, we'll get bail and get out and do whatever we like anyway. And then you have the problem of under trials who are just waiting for the trials to no end. And then you also have actual accused persons who have to suffer maybe needlessly while going through the system, right? Because you might have things like custodial torture because the police simply doesn't have the capacity to gather good evidence. They would rather take the shortcut of beating this guy up and extracting out of his mouth. So you have a whole host of problems tied to the single sort of core, if I may put it that way, of weak state capacity in police as well as the criminal justice system. And would you agree with me that this perhaps is one of the biggest challenges for India as it continues growing and seeks to become a developed country?
I think you're absolutely right. The the inability of the police to follow scientific professional methods, whether in dealing with an accused who's been arrested, or while dealing with crowds, or while dealing with protests, or while dealing with VIP security, all these aspects, because they are not being dealt with in a scientific professional manner, they are creating a lot of gap between what the police is doing and what the public expects in a modern society, with the result that every shortcut further creates an impression in the minds of the citizenry that the police is insensitive to the demands or the expectations of the common man, and that they are not partial, that they are not impartial while dealing with people, and the behavior depends upon the individual rather than on the law. So these two problems of impartiality and professionalism, and the ability to win the trust of the people. We go back to that point of winning the trust. Is continues to be a big problem for the police until this issue is resolved at the systemic level. We will continue to struggle. There are officers, as I said earlier, who have individually sought to bridge this divide by being extremely good leaders, extremely good examples of professional policemen, but their efforts are limited to their own efforts and the system is unable to kind of adopt those as the standard operating procedure. That needs to happen, and that is where statesmanship of the political executive will be an important factor. And the second, obviously, important factor will be the capacity building in terms of more manpower and more training to the available manpower.
Right. We've spoken about functional operational independence of the police from its political masters. We've spoken about the economic cost of a bad policing system, as to how it is going to inhibit our growth, will make people wary of trusting the system, and that lead that. And there are a lot of studies which have shown that social strife, social instability is simply not good for economic growth, and so on. And we have also now spoken about the capacity constraint within the police, as well as the larger criminal justice system, which can have dire consequences if not fixed as a priority. The other aspect is, this is also a political aspect, is that there is not much discourse or demands from the voting populace regarding better police or police reforms or more accountability, right? It almost seems like people have given up. They have put their hands up and they're like, oh, it's a lost cause. It doesn't really matter. And as long as I can get my way out of the police, whenever I come in contact with that system, I am okay with it. So as a larger public good, there is not much popular demand for it. And as opposed to other kinds of popular demand that comes up in election. And now we are going into the election season as well, although it's a general election, but some states are going into elections as well. So my question is, how do we create sort of that awareness among the general voting population so that there is more demand that we as citizens deserve a better policing system?
Yeah, it's a very big challenge, Shri, to convince the people that the conduct of the police constable on your street, or the professionalism or absence of professionalism of your traffic police personnel, or of your state police, or of your city police, is something that you should be bothered about. How do we make people aware of the importance of it? Unfortunately, we have a situation where people are not even bothered about electricity and roads and education and health when they are polling and when they are going to vote. And the voting is done on issues which are external to these realities of life, external to what the government should be doing. So to expect that we will leapfrog into a situation where the public starts demanding better policing, it's a long shot. But I think the first step is for creating pressure groups, whether it is in the form of advocacy or in the form of educating the public through seminars, or talking about it amongst school children or college going students, about how the working of the police department is something that impacts each one of us directly or indirectly, and that why each one of us needs to have a skin in that. I also think that the involvement of the corporate sector, which ultimately is going to be a big user or end user of good law and order, would be very important. I can tell you that, for example, once cyber crimes started, the banks which were affected became interested in cybercrime prevention. And that is a good example to give, because once the banks, who are otherwise not at all bothered about what the police is doing or how crimes are happening or being solved, when cyber crimes started happening in large numbers, they panicked. And then I'm aware that now almost all the banks are more than ready to help the police when they are trying to investigate cyber crimes. Ditto for the mobile phone industry. They started off as being extremely wary of police questions and police inquiries, but when they realized that their services were being used or misused for various crimes, and they were willy-nilly becoming a party to it, then they started to extend their hand. So maybe the answer is that the corporates and the service providers whether it is the car companies or any other service provider, should be made to realize that involving the police in their operations, in their marketing, and in their profit making ventures is going to be a win-win for them. I think that kind of education of the corporate sector also is required. And as I said, creating awareness through public policy interventions is a very essential first step. But it's going to be long haul, I think.
Yeah, and I completely echo your thoughts on this. And I think you're very well outlined all the political, economic, commercial, and social reasons as to why, as we as individuals need to care more about police in our society and system. But again, there is also some amount of work to be done from the police themselves, right? Because a lot of distrust in police emanates from the police side, right? And multiple surveys after surveys have shown that India ranks pretty low when it comes to the trust between the citizen and the cop. And citizens are wary of approaching the police, even if they have genuine problems. Of course, there are exceptions, but this shows that there is a lot more work that needs to be done. So maybe what can the police do to extend a hand? I know there have been initiatives in many states by many state polices and police commissionaries that we have discussed, but overall, as a macro problem, how do you look at this? How do we build trust between the citizen and the cop in our country?
Let me go back, Sri. You raise a very important point, and there's no running away from the fact that there are more than a fair share of bad eggs in the police department, and we need to be cognizant of that and find ways of ensuring that such bad eggs are identified and isolated within the institution, within the organization. Let me go back to what Robert Peel said, more than a century ago, or more than almost 2 centuries ago, in 1829, when the London police was set up. He was the person who set it up in 1829 in London, and when he set it up, he said that the police should aim for public approval of their actions and behavior, and that is the only way for them to gain public respect, willing cooperation, and while doing so, they need to be impartial, they need to be courteous and friendly, and give the message that they are ready to sacrifice for protecting the life, liberty, and property of the citizenry. He also said that the police should use force sparingly and at the minimum level, so that those who are being subjected to violence do not feel that there is any revenge involved in the use of this force, and there should never be an impression that the police is trying to be the final arbiter and usurp the authority of the judiciary. Now, these things were said nearly 200 years ago, and I don't think anything more needs to be said on this about what the police should be doing and what the vision should be for all police leaders at all levels. And this is something that has to be reinforced by rewarding each and every good officer who does whatever little good at whatever level he is, recognizing it and rewarding it, and creating a culture where doing right is perceived by the large majority of the police personnel as the correct thing to do, as something that will give them rewards, rather than have a situation where the righteous police officer or the professional police officer feels isolated within the system. I think the responsibilities of the police leaders, especially the IPS officers who are recruited to be the leaders of the police force, they have a onerous responsibility, not only to be personally above board and kind of epitomizing all these qualities that we talked about, but also have the ability to recognize the good work of their subordinates and also identify the bad eggs and have the capacity, the courage, and the freedom to punish and isolate the bad eggs.
That's fantastic, and I think that's a great note to close our conversation today and this finale of Police Chowki, a limited series on all things policy. And before we conclude, some thoughts. All right, one is of course hats off to countless police officers serving us day and night selflessly and with utmost integrity, honesty, and fidelity to their constitutional oaths. And hats off to countless police officers who have given their lives in the line of duty over the last decades. Thanks to every single one of them and their families. Our effort in this series of Police Chowki was to bring to all our listeners a flavor of the inner workings of police, the different dimensions and aspects of policing, the larger institutional questions around the structure of police, the laws, the regulatory and governance questions, and also to sort of feed some thoughts and ideas into the brains of all the young policy enthusiasts who are listening to us, who may be interested and willing to take up some of these issues and work a lot more to bring about the necessity reform and accountability that our policing system needs. And I'm sure there are many, many good souls working on bringing police reforms, making the right kind of policy interventions in the system so that as a whole, our country benefits and we can uphold the values enshrined in our constitution and move towards a more thriving and robust constitutional republic as envisaged in our constitution. And I must thank you, Mr. Ahmad. You've been very patient with me, answering all the questions that I've had, and having guests on the show has always been a pleasure. So thank you once again to all the guests who appeared, as well as a big thank you to Mr. Ahmad. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you, Shri. I think it's been a good ride. We've touched on issues which hopefully will tickle the intellectual juices of many public policy wonks. I hope good research and good effort comes out of all this. And I continue to believe that the police is one institution that can do so much good for the public. They are doing a lot of good, very silently, very unknown to most people, but they have much more potential. They have much more in the tank as far as being able to do public good is concerned. They need to be recognized. They need to be given more capacity. They need to be given more training, and I think the society needs to have a mayor to put a premium on good policing by asking the political masters for better service from the Indian police.
All right. And before we conclude, one small announcement. So, All Things Policy, your favorite daily public policy podcast, is moving to a new platform. We'll be hosting the episodes on Substack from April 1st onwards. That is the release of today's episode. Of course, this does not mean that the episodes will not be available on all the other audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. It will continue to be available. But since we are on Substack now, you can also head over to All Things Policy on Substack and hit the subscribe button so that every day a new episode lands up straight in your email inbox. So I'm plugging the link in the show notes so you can head over to Substack and subscribe to the show as well. So thank you again, Mr. Ahmad, and hoping to have you back on All Things Policy, maybe in a different avatar very soon.
Thank you, Shri. It's been a great experience. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.